Hello and welcome. In this video, we'll go over how to configure some AI agents to answer user questions with results from our vector database. If you've come from the Upstart video, then you've already seen the Gemini Lite agent in action. Let's open it back up and take a look at some additional options and considerations. First, though, an explanation. If you've done any work with AI agents, you may be wondering why the knowledge base sits before the agent and not as one of its tools. You can absolutely set the query KB workflow as a tool to be used by the AI agent, though that comes with some considerations. For me, I made this for myself and my coworkers with the expectations that the answers given will always be grounded from information in the knowledge base context. The problem is, on a long enough chat session of multiple queries over multiple topics, the AI agent will eventually stop calling on its tools, perceiving it has enough information. To eliminate that event, I set it so every time the user asks a question, it brings in fresh results from a knowledge base. Those results are stored in the agent's memory, giving it more data to work with to answer those questions. The agent system message prevents it from answering questions with information outside of its knowledge base results, though you're free to remove this restriction and allow the user to prompt when the knowledge base is called. Most folks seem to be familiar with AI by now, but AI tools and agentic workflows still are new to many, so I made this with them in mind. Though uncomfortable, feel free to incorporate tools that use live web search like Perplexity or OpenAI's web search to enhance your chats. With some automation in place, you'll be able to keep up to date with the products and services you work with, news outlets, and the latest developments in research. With this set up, you should be able to, for example, take your company's public-facing information or relevant legal to scrape documentation sites and determine if the AI interface is helpful in navigating that information. I've provided two different agent workflows to help answer that question. This one uses the Gemini Lite model, a very fast model that takes the information in the knowledge base and gives it to you in an organized manner. It's great for answering quick questions and looking up sources like I showed in the Ready.gov example. Though I've also included the non-pro Gemini Flash model. What's great about this particular model is it has some deep thinking or reasoning capabilities baked in. If I ask the model something like, I live in Ohio. How likely am I to be affected by a hurricane this time of year? The reasoning model is a bit better at being time aware. It recognizes it's March and Ohio is inland, so I'm probably safe. It takes a little more time to process, but usually the quality of the answers are a bit better, so I figured I'd include it as an agent option, especially when working with technical documentation. For example, if I had a document that said a version of an application was end of life in January, then if I ask what version of the software are currently supported, the reasoning model would omit it from its response because it understands that time has passed. The new Gemini Flash Lite model is getting better at being time aware, though it still tends to give answers based on the face value of the data given. So in the Ohio hurricane example, it will tell me when to expect hurricanes, but it's less concerned about what day it is and where I live. So really feel free to play with this here. Load your own data into the namespace and start asking questions. So you may reach a point when you're ready to put this in front of other people so they can ask their own questions, and we have a few options here how to do that without having to give them your end-to-end login information. There are tons of third-party integrations you can set up as chat triggers like Teams, Slack, and even Discord. Though NN has a built-in hosted chat feature, which lets you make this agent available without having to integrate it into anything else. Let me show you. With hosted chat, NN will host a web page that you and your users can access, or you can embed the chat into your own web page. Also, don't be alarmed to see this option for public chat toggled on by default. The chat won't become public until the agent workflow itself is published. So in order to access this chat, you'll need the URL, then either come in with your own NN credentials or set up a shared account. We'll change this from NN user auth to basic auth and set up a username and password. This is how I elected to give my coworkers access to these workflows after creating the knowledge base. That way all they needed was the chat URL, username, and password. The agent workflow needs to be published along with its sub-workflow. I'll go into Query KB and publish that. Then I can navigate to the URL in the hosted chat and log right in. Easy peasy. Let me ask another question here. How to protect my home in the wintertime? By default, the hosted chat feature works with simple memory, which means conversations are session-based. So I can go back and forth with the agent here, and then if I refresh, the memory is cleared and I'm in a new session. If you like persistent memory, I would look to one of the third-party integrations. Really cool feature regardless, and the fastest way to get the knowledge base into the hands of your stakeholders with the least amount of friction. NNN had recently updated their chat and agents node to allow you to access all of your agents from the chat hub. So if I toggle make available a chat hub and name this Ready.gov, then republish, next head on over to the chat section, and we could configure credentials here and chat with tons of different model providers. However, if we go to Workflow Agents, we'll find our Ready.gov, then ask how to prepare for an earthquake. So this is a nice way to chat with our agents rather than having to go directly into the workflows each time. As you can see, we have a section here for tools, so users could use the knowledge base or web search tools this way as well. Okay, I have a few more examples here. NASA has the Jet Propulsion Lab, and this is my namespace that only contains data from their education section. So let's start with the basics. What is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory? They have a lot of great stuff on how the Mars rovers work, and their continued experiment with robotics. Though treating this as a knowledge base, I know for a fact there's an article about tardigrades, also known as water bears, somewhere on the site. So just to show that it doesn't always have to be presented as a question, I can simply say tardigrades and find that article. This site has tons of fun little projects to get kids and teens interested in science, so let's leverage that. Help me find some projects for my Cub Scouts group. And it gives back tons of good examples broken down by age group. Pretty cool stuff. Next, you may recognize the National Park Service as an early example in the crawl video. So this namespace contains just information from just their fossil subsection. So if I ask, what dinosaur species have been discovered in the national parks, it'll give me back a nice little list. So this page has a table that gives the specimen ID for each dinosaur as well. That ID is important to researchers and could even be the holotype specimen used to name the species. So I'll ask it to list by specimen ID, and we get back the information from that table. So if you recall from the crawler video, that table is not captured in the standard HTTP request, and instead this namespace was created using the headless browser service Browserless. To highlight this, I have a separate namespace made with just the static requests. And I'll ask the same thing. What dinosaur species have been discovered in the national parks? It still gives some really good information, including locations from data on other pages, and references for that table, but not from the table itself. So if I ask it to list by specimen ID, it can't because it simply doesn't have that information. So just taking that example full circle for you. Next, on to a couple of non-government examples. The Apache Airflow documentation website has tons of data to work with. Let's ask, what is Airflow and what is it used for? Apache Airflow is an open source data pipeline orchestration platform which uses workflows defined as DAGs to operate. So I can ask, what are DAGs and how to get started? Realistic though, these aren't the kinds of questions you might be asking if you implement or support Airflow systems regularly. Instead, you'll probably be asking database and server requirements. Because why search the docs if you don't have to? Just a quick question and you have the info you need, plus a source so you can double check that it's still up to date. The 4 gigs for memory stands out to me, so let's say I need that source. These are the little details that I can forget, so to be able to look it up quickly and even provide that URL to a customer is very helpful. Also, since AIs are essentially people pleasers, they can sometimes hallucinate and make things up in order to produce an answer. We don't want that. The system message for the agent is written so it only ever answers questions based on the information on its knowledge base. So if I ask Apache Airflow, how do I file my taxes, which is coming due soon, it shouldn't have the slightest idea and tell me so. Now, of course, the base Gemini model likely knows how to file taxes, but I don't want its knowledge. I want the knowledge that's coming from the knowledge base. Then if it can't formulate a good answer, it says the information isn't available. This is also why the agent in the national parks example didn't just make up specimen IDs to make me happy, and instead only answered the question based on the information it had. So as a reminder, always check a site's robot.txt file to see if it's safe to scrape. And a good place to get your feet wet with scraping is a website called Scrape This Site. As per their request, Just be sure to add lessons and FAQs to the block sections of the crawl filter before you do. Our sandbox only has a handful of pages, so you can crawl, scrape, and upsert quickly just to get used to things. Next, let's discuss API limits. In the last few months, Google has changed its free tier a few times, where the request per day limit was 200, then it dropped down to 20, and then now on Gemini Lite 3.0, the limit's up to 500. Knowing all of this is subject to change again, I want to offer another alternative if you start hitting too many limits or simply want to experiment with some other models. Let's head to OpenRouter.com. OpenRouter is a site that gives you API access to tons of AI models, both paid and free. Plus, they already have an end-to-end integration, so there's less setup on our end. Creating an account is easy. All you need is an email and password, or you can log in with one of the integrations like I'm doing for Google. Then create. I'll just call mine the account name for now. Then copy the API key off to a safe place. So back in my workflows, if you check the extras folder, there's an OpenRouter agent available. Select one of the two OpenRouter nodes and create credentials, then paste the API key in there and save. I've got a couple free NVIDIA models pre-selected for you in these nodes. You can also check the website for more details on these, but for now, I'll just keep this the small NVIDIA model. OpenRouter gives 50 requests per day on the free tier, but if you end up using any of their paid models and get $5 worth of credits, the free model limits increase to 1,000. Those extra requests give some flexibility to implement additional features into the agent, like query enhancement, which is why, if you're wondering, why this workflow looks a little bit different from the Google ones, and that's because we're using two agents. A smaller agent to remove the conversational filler from a user's question and to extract keywords, then a larger model to actually go about answering the user's question. And as a longer question that has words in it that won't necessarily help the retrieval process, like please help, or anything else that could potentially impact the retrieval process, then send those results to the larger agent to answer the question. This is a pretty basic version of query enhancement to improve user questions before entering the retrieval process. Using it in, there's tons of wiggle room before and after the agent in the workflow to guard against malicious or inappropriate prompts, implement an FAQ for common questions, check answers before they make it to the user, stop and ask for additional context. Essentially, all the systems that are in play in a larger chat system can also be implemented here to some extent. Which leads to my final thoughts on agents and where you can take things from here. Let's say you have your own data in Pinecone and it's answering your questions well, and you're ready to start working with private company data, and your users are ready to move off the hosted chat onto something integrated with more polished responses. Essentially, we're ready to invest some money in the system and move away from free tier. My first recommendation is to move off the Pinecone hybrid index and onto two separate indexes, one for dense data and one for sparse. This will open up options for additional filtering and re-ranking of those results from the knowledge base. On the model side, switch to a self-hosted private model or look to hosting services like AWS Bedrock and SageMaker. Also, lots of AI companies have paid tiers so your data isn't used in training. Turn the knowledge base into a tool and integrate additional tools for your users based on their needs. You can start to increase the vector dimensions and decrease the chunk size to start getting more granular chunks. Then change the top K value to fine-tune retrieval. I'll touch on this more in the next video, but as I said, Google Sheets is best for small projects, so if you start working with a lot more data, I recommend switching to Supabase or a similar service for your data tables. Also, look to Pro, Enterprise, or self-hosting options for end-to-end, as I explained in the scraping video. And finally, look to integrate your chat directly where your users are, and explore services like MongoDB for chat memory so conversations persist between users over multiple sessions. Just my recommendations here, but there are many ways to roam, so do what makes sense for you. And with that, I have one final video in the series dealing with two additional sub-workflows. The update sub-workflow, which helps you check if any of the previously scraped data has since been updated, and sitemap extraction as an alternative for crawling web pages. Thanks for watching.